Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to Jamaica 411. Thank you so much for stopping by, keeping me company as usual. If you're here with me for the first time, welcome, welcome. Please share, subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, as well as feel free to leave your comments in the comments section. To my subscribers and regular viewers, welcome back. Very nice to have you as always. And I know you know the ropes. Please go ahead, give the video a thumbs up from now on because you know you're getting quality stuff here. And remember also to share to all your groups, to all the persons you know are interested in politics and interested in FINSAC, particularly those who you may have an argument with over it. Yes, please share it to them. Then you can return, and then we can have some fulsome discussion about what else Omar had to say. Of course, we thank you in advance. So, without further ado, let us continue. We were at page 8, but if you have not seen the previous video, if you're coming on this one for the first time, then I would urge you to watch the previous video. And as you can see, the video is entitled Shocking Revelations by Omar Davies. You don't want to miss that one. And then return to this one because it's a continuation and you may not get the understanding of what is being said without seeing that first. All right, so let's get down to business. So where we left off, Omar was about to tell us what the objectives or operations of FINSAC were. What was it all about? What was it set up to do is what he's going to tell us. I know that sometimes persons refer to the whole matter as FINSAC, as if FINSAC and the setting up of FINSAC was a bad thing. No, it was a consequence, yes, of what was happening. Omar is saying, no, it's not the high interest rate. Why the financial institutions fail? Because 3 banks, the foreign banks, which were under stricter guidelines, they did not fail. Jamaica National Building Society, which is also a building society operating in the same market, they did not fail. None of the credit unions operating in the same market, they did not fail. And therefore, his argument is, had interest rate been the issue, then all of them should have failed. Of course, we know that other businesses failed, and it would be unreasonable for him to say that they failed for any other reasons than the high interest rate. Then again, let us not go ahead of ourselves. Let us let Omar do the talking. He's on the floor now, and we are just going to read what he said and see if we can get the understanding from his point of view as to what it was that happened. All right, so let's now read. So the objectives or operations of FINSAC. It is important to indicate that FINSAC was established after it became apparent that the problems in the financial sector were widespread. It is inaccurate to speak of FINSAC having clients, in quotation, who they treated badly. All these, quotation, clients of FINSAC were inherited from failed institutions with existing contracts made with those institutions. What he's saying, the banks failed. Remember the banks failed, those failed banks? They had bad debtors, which is the reason why they failed. They also had other things that they were doing, which also caused them to fail. What the government did was to establish FINSAC. And the purpose of FINSAC was to, first of all, take over the banks and the other institutions, or assume ownership of them, and then take over the debts that those institutions held. The bad debts, they were transferred to FINSAC, and then they repackage the banks and the other institutions, and then sold them without these debts. If they did not do that, then they could not even think of selling Workers Bank or Eagle Commercial Bank, even though they put them in one single group that they called Union Bank, in order that they may have some scale of operations, because BNS is big NCB's big, CIBC big, and they were very small. So he packaged them like that and took over all of the bad debts that they had. And FINSAC held all of those bad debts. But FINSAC didn't just hold the bad debts just so. They gave them money as well, So they took the bad debts out and gave them some money to operate and then took shares in those companies. And it was the shares in those companies that were actually sold so the government could get back some of the money that they had spent when they gave them the money. You follow? Right. So they are saying that the persons whose accounts, bad debt accounts, and the companies that the government took over or FINSAC took over, they are not to be considered clients because they did not sign any contract with them. They simply hold the debts that these people and companies hold. You follow? Great. So let me continue. Against that backdrop, FINSAC was established to protect thousands of 1. Savers in the failed institutions, 2. Pensioners and employees whose pension funds were mismanaged by the failed institutions, and 3. The insurance policies issued by the failed institutions. FINSAC was not established to protect the owners or managers of the failed institutions or their bad debtors. Yes, so I did not mention the pensioners, and I apologize to you pensioners. Had they done what the IMF recommended that they do, I know some persons in the comment section said they don't believe it, that the IMF told them any such thing, but it would be rather foolish for Omar to be saying something that could be proved wrong because everything was left at the Ministry of Finance in the file for FINSAC. But if they had followed what the IMF told them to do and allow everything to crash, even the pensioners and those persons who were working and saving towards a pension, that would go down too. And even the NIS, I believe, is also invested or being held. Remember, the NIS, the government don't have any bank. The government does not have a commercial bank. I do believe that most of the accounts of the government was held with NCB. So if NCB went down, then the whole of that gone down too. So that, of course, was not a feasible option. So Omar Davies went on to say, in speaking about the operations of FINSAC, there has been an attempt to suggest bias and political interference in decision making. As the minister responsible for the institution, I challenge anyone to provide any evidence to that effect. It is a fact that many persons, including prominent political personalities, approach me to intervene on their behalf. There are some who presently serve in the cabinet. In every instance, I would simply refer them to the FINSAC management. So he's saying that even some of the persons who approached him for a little bailout were serving in the cabinet. This would be the present cabinet. And at that time, it would have been Bruce Golding, Bruce Golding's cabinet. So we know that all they kind of get caught up. So we don't know for him he was talking about. But anyway, let us continue. It is also important for us to jog our memories about the caliber of persons who served as board members of FINSAC and the related companies. Consider the chairman of FINSAC, Dr. Gladstone Bonnick, the late Dr. the Honorable Ken Rattray, and the Honorable Shirley Tyndall, all persons of eminent distinction. In terms of the intervened entities, Mr. Dennis Morrison, QC, now Justice of Appeal Morrison, meaning that he was later made a judge of the Court of Appeal, that's what that means, was first chairman of Union Bank and later of Life of Jamaica, and the Honorable Oliver Clark was chairman of NCB. Oliver Clark would be that fellow of the Gleaner. Can anyone seriously consider a situation of the political directorate instructing such persons to act in a biased or improper way? Me not think so. But then again, anything is possible. So what he's saying is, before you start to talk about bias and preferential treatment given to some, just look and see the persons who were sitting on the board that I put there, right? You have, first of all, Dr. Gladstone Bonnick. You had Ken Rattray, if I remember right. Was Ken Rattray a politician? Then you had Shirley Tyndall. Then you have Dennis Morrison, QC, who was a judge in the Court of Appeal. And you have the caliber of Oliver Clark. And he's saying, but you can imagine me, I try to tell them, say, all right, now give that one no blind, but give this one a blind. That's basically what he's saying. But, that's he's presenting an argument, all right, to debunk all the things that were being said, which gave him an opportunity because these things were being said, outside of the commission being created. So now the commission, having been created, gave him an opportunity to address all of these things that people were saying. You follow? Wonderful. In terms of the approach to the intervention, it is instructive to note that the advice from the multilateral financial institutions, which would have been the IMF, the World Bank, and the IDB, was that we should accept the failures in the banking system as part of the operations of a market economy. On this basis, it was suggested that receivers should be placed in the institutions who would then pay back to depositors and creditors a percentage of their investment or savings based on the eventual value of the assets recovered. I wonder how that would work since they were insolvent, because there, according to R. Danny Williams, there was a mismatch between the assets and liabilities, which basically mean that the liabilities in some cases exceeded the assets, which meant that both the creditors and the depositors would lose everything. Anyway, let me continue. As is known, the government of Jamaica rejected this advice. Well, I don't know that we know any such thing, because it's the first we're reading about it. Certainly, Liz knew, because she always told us what happened in cabinet. Anyway, was this a correct decision? That's a question. That's $1 million question, Omar Davies. What do you think? Well, he says here, it is obvious that such an issue would have strong points on either side. Well, I personally think that bailing out the people was the right one. I don't know what you guys think. Put it in the comment section if you think he should have just allowed the banks to fail, and the insurance companies, and, to help with the people and their deposits. Or, because remember, these persons who had their money in the bank, they were making super interest, they were being paid all 20-30% interest on the money that they put in there. So having made all that money in what some of my subscribers and have said in the comment section is a Ponzi scheme, why should they not have been allowed to go down with them? Common sense ought to have dictated to them that this was not sustainable, but greed was motivating them as much as anybody else, right? And now they fail. They don't want to accept their own foolishness, and we, the taxpayers, must hug it up. How many of you share that point of view? Or do you share the point of view that, all right, they made a mistake, yes, they made some money, but for the sake of the peace, and for the sake of giving them a second chance, or for the sake of saying, okay, they learned a lesson, let's give them a chance, and we will foot the bill and give them back their money. Say if you agree, which one of those points of view you agree with, or if you have your own, let me know in the comment section. All right, great. Let me continue. So Omar was asking whether or not it was the right decision. Me personally think it was. Let me know what you think. He said, I supported the decision made then to intervene and rehabilitate the failed institutions. Yes, I inquired this morning and found out that there were 3 persons at least in the cabinet when the discussion took place that was for the intervention. You know that some may have accepted what the IMF said, And the three of them would have been the first one, who was very strenuous in his objection to the IMF solution, was, I'm told, Dr. Peter Phillips. He was totally against the people losing their savings and their pensions and all that kind of something. The next person, I mean, this is no surprise to anybody, was Portia Simpson-Miller herself. you know, so I can imagine how she did go on, knowing, having heard about how she can go on. Then now, believe it or not, the third person I was told who was objecting to the IMF advice and was for the intervention, yes, is the same Omar Davies. I was told so from a good source that Omar wanted to bail out the people who had deposits and savings and policies and all that kind of people, but not the borrowers, So it's true. So those three persons were on the side, whispering in a PJ ears and saying, "I could go this way," and so on. And then, as you know, at the end of the day, they were the ones that won out. Great. Let me continue. He went on to say, "However, I respect the views of those who felt that the institution should have been allowed to fail and creditors paid back whatever fraction of their savings or investments was recoverable when assets were realized, meaning sold. I still maintain the position that intervention and rehabilitation was the correct path." May I agree with you too. "Following on the heels of liberalization of the exchange system, it was not felt at that time that we could risk the possible social chaos when citizens realized that their legitimate savings and investments had simply evaporated. It was difficult to estimate the size of the problem and hence the eventual cost of intervention, partly due to the off-balance sheet hiding of liabilities and other accounting irregularities." Let me read that for you again, because what Omar is saying, they had initially estimated that it would cost 20% of the gross domestic product, meaning that 20% of all that we produce is what it would cost in taxes, right? Because when we talk about government doing anything, it's taxes we're talking about. Or I suppose they would print money, but in taxes to fix the problem. But when they went in, it ended up costing twice. And what Omar is saying is that it was difficult to estimate the size of the problem and hence the eventual cost of the intervention, which was 40% of the production of the country, partly due to the off-balance sheet hiding of liabilities and other accounting irregularities. Because you imagine that. So what he's saying is that around about 20% of what it is we ended up paying as taxpayers were what they found later, because these institutions found a way to dodge the liabilities that they had of the persons who were not paying, those bad debtors, to give the impression that them operations are going good and, encourage people to further put money in them or invest with them. Right? I mean, that was a colossal. I mean, that was amazing, right? And that was because the regulations that were in place were weak. It's much different now. Great. Let me continue. "It cannot escape notice that all of the complaints being voiced at the Commission of Inquiry came from the owners or managers and the bad debtors. They are simply arguing that the government should have also protected them in the intervention." Yes, my peeps. And that them a complain about the people who borrowed this money, right? And couldn't pay it back. They wanted to be bailed out as well. Where the hell would I get money for that? I mean, if it costs me 40% of the gross domestic product just to pay back the investors, the depositors, those who hold pensions in pension scheme, the pensioners, as well as the policy holders in insurance. Where the hell the government was going to get money from for pay back the people who had the bad debt? So they wanted to be able to borrow, lose the money, and then keep all their assets, right? So the government, look at the position they wanted the government to be in. The government could not recover the money that they would have spent on them. When the government gave how much $1 billion to these insurance companies and banks, they took shares. You follow? Which they could sell and get back some of the money, if not all of the money, or even more than they had given to those people in the first place. You understand? But when you go bail out the debtors, where the money would come from for the government to recover, except through the sale of the property. You follow me? So I mean, what they were asking for was grossly unreasonable. That means they want us to hug up while they benefited, right? Lost because they became bad debtors, and then we must hug up the entire cost with no way of recovering the money that we would have paid to bail them out. No, man, that's not so unreasonable. I don't know what you think. You tell me in the comment section if you think that's reasonable. Let me continue. And as a matter of fact, before I continue, the whole idea with this commission of inquiry, when these persons went to participate, it is exactly that. They are hoping to make a case for the government of Bruce Golding to come and assist them by paying off the debt that they owe, or partially, or retire. I don't know how they were going to retire it, right? And of course, it never happened because before the whole thing was over, the government changed. The PNP never pursued it. When Andrew came, supposed to pursue it, and then all kind of things happened. And all we're having now is just the raw data, and we're reading it. You follow? So, I mean, you just have to hug up them loss and start again. Simple as that. Anyway, so Omar Davies went on to say the cost of protecting savers or pension funds holders of insurance policies amounted to 40% of gross domestic product. Consider what would have been the cost if bad debtors and the owners were also bailed out. It would have been unjustified and irresponsible for the government to do so. Maybe if we did find oil, we could have did help them out, but we don't have no oil. Same argument that I was saying, and believe it or not, I'm reading this thing for the first time. That's why you see me struggling going through, right? Anyway, let me hustle on. Even whilst recognizing that bad debtors could not be bailed out, the government took specific steps to seek to alleviate their situation, and that try to help them. A special committee headed by the Honorable Beverly Lopez, you remember her, was established to review the cases of those companies which could impact on economic output and employment. In other words, just like the banks had to be bailed out and insurance companies because they had such a great impact on the economy. They were seeking other persons who would fit into that category, those smaller businesses. Anyway, it says here, whilst the committee met for a period, it was hampered by the fact that most bad debtors simply wanted their debts to be written off and their assets to be returned to them. It should also be remembered that the government took special action to address the situation where bad debtors had put up their homes as collateral for loans taken out. Again, a special window was provided to such bad debtors whereby, on concessionary terms, they could retrieve their homes from FINSAC. A point seldom raised in the discussion on FINSAC relates to the silent majority, the hundreds of thousands of Jamaicans whose savings, pensions, and life insurance policies were saved by the intervention of FINSAC. Also, never mentioned are the thousands of former bad debtors who came to a mutually accepted compromise agreements with FINSAC, which they honored and moved on with their lives. Included in that group is the present chairman of government tourism entity, who had his hotel returned to him so that he could earn his way to recovery. So he's saying that there were plenty good news where persons were able to negotiate themselves into a position where they could, I suppose, pay off the debt, or maybe they write down some. So let's continue. A final point to be made is that the multilaterals, although initially disagreeing with the approach taken, eventually commended the methodology employed based on rigorous analysis of FINSAC's operations. This commendation was backed by the decision to loan the government of Jamaica a sum of $350 million to help in meeting the cost of intervention. Is it likely that such support would have been forthcoming for an institution with questionable practices? Perhaps not. Sale of portfolio. So he's dealing now with the sale of the portfolio of debts that FINSAC held. All right. And what he would have sold basically would have been the mortgages and the loans. It happens in the US. Two you may have heard of called Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So they would sell them at a discounted rate, and the persons would buy and then recover the full amount of the debt. So let us hear now how that decision was made. The decision to sell the bad loan portfolio has elicited a great deal of comment. One view is that the government should have retained the portfolio and dealt with bad debtors on an individual basis. There are several reasons why that course was not pursued. The first is that FINSAC was established with explicit objectives to intervene and take action to rehabilitate the failed institutions and then move on. To retain the bad debt portfolio would imply its continued existence over an extended period. However, above and beyond that reason, over the period during which FINSAC sought to deal with bad debtors, it became apparent that the pressures on employees would continue to mount. It was felt that if the bad debts were sold to a private company, there would be greater willingness on the part of the bad debtors to come to a formal agreement. So he's saying, when the government control, everybody always want government give them a ply. So they were putting a lot of pressure on the staffers, and then felt that, if they were to sell it, that would ease. I strongly suspect that what he sell it for is to get the money for budgetary support, because that was money that they would have spent, and of course they would want it back. So I don't know what kind of reason this Omar is given, but that's his reason. So let us continue. A second question relates to why the bad debt portfolio was sold to a foreign company. There was never a decision to sell to a foreign company. Rather, there was an attempt to elicit interest from reputable companies, local or foreign. A prominent local company showed preliminary interest, but indicated that their analysis suggested a maximum offer of 10 cents in the dollar. You hear that? They wanted to pay only 1/10 of what the value of the bad debt was in terms of what it is they would recover. So they would give the government 10 cents and then collect, I suppose they go after it aggressively to collect money and get 90%. That's very high. But anyhow, let me continue reading. The fact is that the offer from the principals of what became JRF was the best we received, as the Jamaican taxpayers would benefit not only from an initial cash payment, but also an increasing percentage of further collections. Oh, I see. Now that was a very interesting arrangement. So they sold the assets to JRF, so much cents to the dollar. And then if there were to be future increase in collections, the government will get a percentage of that. Is that what he's saying? Oh, that sounds like another innovation. I wonder who gave him that idea. We're making a note of all these things, because we're going to ask the question again in another video, right? So it seemed as if he's saying that we got the best deal from JRF. But I'm very curious to know which local company had put in an offer. I think that we need to go and discover that. Wouldn't that be interesting? Yes, I think so too. Anyway, what's his conclusion? Let's see. So, in conclusion, Omar Davies said, there are several lessons which have been learned from the intervention and the events which followed. While not representing an exhaustive list, the following are ones which should be highlighted in trying to now influence the way in which the commission goes, right? He says, the first is that there should never be any attempt to relax regulatory requirements to accommodate domestic entrepreneurs in the financial sector. We have learned that affirmative action has no place in the regulation of financial entities. A second lesson is that there is a need for continuing review and tightening of the regulatory framework. The present regulations need to be strengthened such that the authorities can take swift preemptive action even against unlicensed institutions. Our recent experience with the Ponzi schemes was that the authorities were hampered as they could not act unless it could be established that the operators were engaged in activities reserved for licensed institutions. It is a travesty that nothing has so far been done about this. Do you understand what he's saying? The Ponzi schemes he was referring to would have been Olint and Cash, what was it called? Cash Plus. They were, taking money from Peter and paying Paul. And the people, because they were offering 10% per month, again, these people don't learn, my peeps. Them don't learn at all. When the banks were offering this high interest rate, at least these were banks and they never failed before in the past. And they had reason to think that it wouldn't happen and the government would not allow it to happen. And it was true because eventually the government bailed them out. No less than 10 short years later, they are back at it again. Having been bailed out, then they learn a lesson. And when this Cash Plus and the Olint and the other one, Worldwide something or the other, were offering them 10% per month, right? Which is 120% per annum interest on the money that they borrowed. They think, and again, Perkins was saying, where the dickens were they going to be able to invest money in order to earn 120% on it to pay you? And they did not care. The only thing they saw was the money. Maybe they didn't think government would bail them out. The only difference now is that this was not a government regulated thing. So if them go in there and lose, which they did, many of them lost their money, rightfully so, right? Because when you're going to put your money somewhere, you must first think about it, right? Motivated by greed. That's all that was about. This time around, they all lost their shirts and there was nobody to bail them out and nobody to blame but themselves. In considering this matter, it must never be forgotten that hundreds of thousands of Jamaicans were saved from financial devastation by the decision to intervene in and rehabilitate the failed institutions. Difficult decisions were made in trying circumstances. The country's savings base was preserved, and the experience prompted a thorough review of the financial regulatory framework. One result is that the country now boasts a robust and well-regulated financial sector. He went on to say, it is a shame that this important episode in our post-independence history is being subjected to a flawed process for vulgar political objectives rather than balanced fact-finding and analysis. Omar Davies, and this was dated May 11, 2011. Come, Omar, man, that's not fair. Yes, it was. It was for the same reasons why it's being released now. But surely, if you were in that position, Omar, you'd have done the same damn thing. Talk truth. Talk the truth and shame the devil. Anyway, folks, that's what I have for you today. I hope you found it interesting. I hope we've learned something from what Omar is saying and his recommendations. So I want to thank you for subscribing, giving the video a thumbs up, sharing, and leaving your comments. Until next time, take good care of yourselves and walk good.